Lesson 17, Landmark Supreme Court Cases Related to the First Amendment, Part 4. This should conclude the cases related to the First Amendment that we are going to study. Let's pick up with Hazelwood School District versus Kohlmeyer. This is a case involving students in a school, I believe in Missouri. We're in 1988 when the case was actually heard by the Supreme Court. This deals with free press, student press in the schools. In May of 1983, the principal of Hazelwood High School, St. Louis, Missouri, ordered the deletion of 2 pages from the Spectrum. The Spectrum was the student newspaper for this particular high school. Now, what did the principal object to the stories that were in the student newspaper? Well, here you can see the stories. One was about teen pregnancy, and the other one was about divorce and the impact of divorce on kids. Now, why did the principal object to stories about teen pregnancy and the impact of divorce on students? First, he felt that the girls described in the story could be easily identified and that was not appropriate. And the reference to sexual activity was certainly not suitable for the younger students at the school. The story about the divorce, it named a student who complained about her father's behavior, and the principal objected to that fact. The Spectrum was written and edited by the school's journalism class. The 3 student editors filed a suit against the principal and the school district for not allowing them to express their speech and their press, a violation of their constitutional rights to free speech and free press. In 1985, a federal district court judge ruled against the students. In 86, a federal appeals court overturned that ruling. And so in 1987, the Supreme Court decided to hear the case. This is several years after when the newspaper was censored by the principal. The students involved in the case were no longer in high school. It's kind of interesting. Sometimes it takes a very slow process for cases to reach the Supreme Court. Many times you have to exhaust the appellate courts, go through the lower appellate courts. An appellate court is a court of appeal. We'll have a later lesson on both the federal court system and the state court system of North Carolina. It's a very famous case. It's in any journalism class in a public school or any school will certainly study this case. Chief Justice of the Supreme Court was William Rehnquist at the time. In his majority opinion, he stated that schools must be able to set high standards for student speech and may refuse to publish student speech that does not meet those standards. The Spectrum was not a forum for public expression, but rather a tool for teaching and learning. Educators are entitled to exercise greater control over this form of student expression. So it was a 5-3 ruling in favor of the school district against the students. 5-3 in this case because there was a vacancy on the Supreme Court that had not yet been filled. So it was still the Supreme Court meets in such a situation, 5-3 in favor of the school district against the students. School officials across the nation were very pleased with this decision. One of the minority justices wrote a very hard-hitting dissent in which he wrote that the schools cannot act as thought police stifling discussion on all but state-approved topics, and advocacy of all but the official position. One of our cartoons, again, by Stu, Principal's Office. Apparently you were wrong. The First Amendment does not protect our right to publish. Principal Peters is a poopy pants. Another First Amendment case related to the schools is Bethel School District versus Frazier, 1986. Again, free speech in the schools. In 1983, Matt Frazier from a Washington high school, Spanaway High, he gave a speech to a school assembly to nominate a classmate for an office in student government. That's Matt Frazier. Bethel Senior High School in Spanaway, Washington State. The speech was filled with sexual innuendos, not obscenity, but the speech did bring about disciplinary action from the administration. Innuendos meaning the speech did not come right out and say explicitly sexual activities, but it could be implied. This is Matt Frazier nominating his friend Jeff Coleman, giving his speech before Coleman gave his speech. I know a man who is firm. He's firm in his pants. He's firm in his shirt. His character is firm. But most of all, his belief in you, the students of Bethel, is firm. Jeff Coleman is a man who takes his point and pounds it in. If necessary, he'll take an issue and nail it to the wall. He doesn't attack things in spurts. He drives hard, pushing and pushing until finally he succeeds. Jeff is a man who will go to the very end, even the climax, for each and every one of you. So please vote for Jeff Coleman, as he'll never come between us and the best our school can be. There was a long pause after the word come on oral delivery, but no comma in the written version, according to Matthew Frazier. Now, obviously, Matthew Frazier was second in his class. He was a senior. He was a salutatorian. We all know what he was doing here, trying to be cute, trying to be funny for his friend Jeff Coleman. And the administration, the teachers, administration were rightfully upset with this speech. So he was suspended for 2 days in violation of school policy against disruptive behavior. He appealed because he was prohibited from speaking at his graduation ceremony, and this is something that Matt Frazier really wanted to do. But because of the suspension on his transcript, he was, on his high school record, he was prohibited from speaking. But this was kind of the reason for the lawsuit. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, helped him put together a case against the school district, claiming his First Amendment right to free speech. The Washington Supreme Court agreed that Frazier's free speech had been violated. So that's why it's Bethel versus Frazier. The school system of Bethel, Washington, is appealing the ruling by the Washington Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld the school district. They supported the school district in a 7-2 ruling. The school officials acted within the Constitution by disciplining Frazier. It was okay. They could have suspended him for this speech. Now, why? Well, Warren Berger wrote the majority opinion. He pointed out that there was a huge difference here between the protest in Tinker. Remember the armband case? This was a major issue of public policy. The major difference between the students wearing those black armbands and, frankly, Matt Frazier's lewd speech. very, very sexually implicit, certainly not explicit, but sexually implicit. And you're speaking before the entire student body, which includes freshmen, sophomores. And there's quite a difference in the two situations. Berger pointed that out. The purpose of public education in America is to teach fundamental values. Warren Berger. Purpose of public education in America is to teach fundamental values. Berger conceded that the First Amendment might permit the use of an offensive form of expression by an adult making a political point, but the same latitude of expression is not permitted to children in a public school. So along with the Hazelwood case, the Bethel case shows the court re-examining the issue of student expression in schools and finding that certain limits of expression are permitted by the First Amendment. Now, this was a more conservative court. In the 1980s, your rulings are going to be more conservative than they were in the 1960s. So also keep that in mind. This is a more of a conservative interpretation of the Constitution as opposed to the 1960s when it was more of a liberal interpretation of the Constitution. We'll talk about that in a later lesson when we discuss the Supreme Court. Last case is Skokie, the Skokie case, the National Socialist Party versus Skokie. This is a freedom of assembly case. And this neo-Nazi party, the National Socialist Party of America, they wanted to march in the town of Skokie, Illinois, which was a largely Jewish community. Some Skokie residents actually had been Holocaust survivors. In fact, 1 out of every 6 Jewish citizens in the late 1970s was a survivor or was directly related to a Holocaust survivor. The debate was clear-cut. Did American Nazis have a right to march through a Jewish neighborhood? Or was this intimidation and the Jewish people of Skokie, that community, having a right to live without fear and intimidation? The town, arguing that the march would assault the sensibilities of its citizens and spark violence, managed to win an injunction against the marchers, a court injunction. Now, what is that? An injunction is a court action that prevents or stops that action from occurring until a court can hear the case and make a ruling. So we had an injunction in this case. So the ACLU, again, the American Civil Liberties Union, took the case on behalf of the Nazis, and they defended their right to march. A major issue involved was whether the swastika should be allowed to be displayed during the march. Of course, the symbol of the Nazi Party. One concentration camp survivor declared, "I do not know if I could control myself if I saw the swastika in a parade." Skokie attorneys argued that for Jews, seeing the swastika was just like being physically attacked. The Illinois Supreme Court sympathized with the Skokie residents but allowed the National Socialist Party to march anyway. However, the court allowed the ban on displaying the swastika to stand, barring any flags or clothing with a symbol on it. So basically, the Illinois State Supreme Court said, okay, Nazis, you can march, but you cannot display your swastika. You cannot have a flag of it or put it on your clothes. The United States Supreme Court let the Illinois decision stand. When that case went before the court, they simply said, we're going to go with the Illinois State Supreme Court decision. So this case shows that the First Amendment, once again, not only protects views that are popular, but also very unpopular. The First Amendment protects what Oliver Wendell Holmes called many years ago a marketplace of ideas, where all views can be expressed, whether they are popular or not. This was a costly victory for the ACLU as they lost 30,000 of its members. In the end, they never did march. The Nazis did not. They held some rallies in the Chicago area, but they never did march. So this concludes all of our lessons on these landmark cases related to the First Amendment and the 5 basic freedoms contained in the First Amendment.